So now you're supporting Blackwater in the early days of Afghanistan, Iraq. When does the turn come where you go from supporting military contracts for the U.S. to government contracts for Abu Dhabi, an ally?
So that was a bit unexpected. I wrapped up working for Blackwater. I did some aviation work with them and then running Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad's security detail. And that's what really got me into the executive protection of running a security detail for a VIP.
And who was the ambassador that you were protecting?
Zalmay Khalilzad.
And he was what, ambassador to the U.S.?
U.S. ambassador to Iraq.
U.S. ambassador to Iraq.
A phenomenal man. Like, there's people that you protect sometimes that you're like, I really don't want to,
take a bullet for that guy.
Right.
Yeah.
But this man he was a phenomenal human being. So I wrapped that up. One of my teammates that I'd worked with on Blackwater and in the military had started a job with a Defense Threat Reduction Agency. And they have a contingency operations team called Technical Support Groups. So I went over and joined them and spent a couple of years working with them. And we can get into details about what Ditcher actually does. According to their website, what their website says. I won't talk about really what we did on the TSG teams, but
TSG,
Technical Support Groups.
Support Groups.
Yeah. So one of the program managers and owners of that contract that was supporting Ditcher, a couple of years later, reached out to me and said, hey, I've started a business in Abu Dhabi. We're going to be training and advising the Presidential Guard. Are you interested in moving to the Middle East? And my daughter Jaden was, I think, 10 years old, 9 or 10 at the time. And I'd always wanted to take her to the Middle East to a safe location and teach her the culture and show her where I'd spent the better part of my adult life. So I jumped on the opportunity and went to Abu Dhabi for 4 years.
So Abu Dhabi's in the United Arab Emirates, for anybody who doesn't know right away. It's actually the capital of UAE, even though Dubai is the most, I would argue, the most famous city.
For a reason.
Yeah, in the United Arab Emirates. And it's interesting to me because I also took a contract in the UAE 2018 and 19, after I left CIA. There was an appetite, a huge appetite, specifically in the UAE for experienced American experts. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so what we were told was their national security advisor was a former high-ranking Australian commando. And I forget his exact role, if he was a brigadier general, but he was one of the highest-ranking military members of the Australian military. He had been hired by the UAE's military to come in and basically reform their military organization, which includes their Presidential Guard. Their Presidential Guard is akin to our Secret Service. That's the roles that they do, protecting the royal family. And so he put a big push in bringing subject matter experts from around the world into Abu Dhabi and Dubai and teach their instructors how to teach, what to teach, why to teach it this way, and help train up their military. So there was a massive initiative a couple of years before you got there that they actually did. The UAE implemented, you might know the term, I won't say it's a draft, but it was, it's like a
compulsory service.
Compulsory service, thank you, there you go. A compulsory service. And a lot of the UAE nationals were very patriotic with that. Like they were proud that they were in their normal daily lives also doing this compulsory service of various training programs for the military, for their nation. So he brought in a bunch of Australians, Kiwis, Brits, and Americans from very particular skill sets. And we started teaching anything from counter IED, EOD, shooting, moving, driving tactics, intelligence gathering, venue assessments, threat assessments.
Yeah, building, clearing, self-defense. Very similar to what we were doing as well. You know, it's one of the things that I think makes the UAE such a brilliant country is that nobody talks about the UAE, right? When you think about wealth and power in the Middle East, you think Saudi Arabia. That the whole world thinks Saudi Arabia.
Right away.
UAE is what, like a tenth of the size of Saudi Arabia, if that, right? 800,000 national citizens. 800,000, less than a
Very
million.
small.
Super small, right? Incredibly wealthy country. Very pro-Western, very modernized country. They still have their own Sharia law that they follow, but that's broken into the 7 different emirates that make up the United Arab Emirates. They have this really strange to us custom of having both royalty and elected officials.
Yes.
Like you were just saying,
Yes.
for those of us that heard you say it in your words, you were there for the Presidential Guard, which is there to protect the royal family. So there's an interesting dynamic there. But all of that to say, an incredibly patriotic country. And when compulsory service was introduced, those 800,000 nationals didn't balk at it.
No.
Now, an Emirati culture is nothing like American culture. An Emirati veteran is nothing like an American veteran. 2 years of compulsory service is completely different than 4 or 5 years of voluntary service. The levels of professionalism are different. And I think it's really interesting because I came in because they were doing the same kind of intelligence reform that you said they were doing for national security reform. So they were bringing in subject matter experts from the United States and from Australia and from New Zealand and from Canada and from Great Britain. And it was an incredible smorgasbord of people to work with. But the challenge was all these people are Westerners. Western mindset, Western discipline, Western expectations, Western structure.
100%.
And that did not jive well with Emirati customs at the time.
Yeah, we had this joke. There's a short book that talks about Lawrence of Livermore that went out there in the Arabian desert that, 40, 50 years ago, the book was written. It still stands true to this day about their culture. And what's interesting when you first walk into a meeting with their upper leadership, we expect to walk in a 30-minute meeting, like here's the agenda, here's the topics, let's get it done, solve problems, move on. You walk into their meetings, and now I appreciate it. It's, how are you?
Yeah.
How's your family?
It's personal.
How's your children? We'll talk about random things. So like if it's a ABC, you start with D, F, Z, maybe you make it to A.
Yeah.
So you have to really learn their culture and adhere to them and slow down, be patient.
There's a really practical element. In my opinion, there's a practical element to how Khaliji, wealthy Arabs handle themselves in business settings and professional settings. They're testing the relationship all the time, because if they know negotiation is coming in the future, so they don't want to wait until the future to determine how to negotiate with you. They want to understand right now. So they're testing who's in control of the conversation. They're testing what are your limits for blowing a 30-minute meeting. How do you feel if they show up 11 minutes late? How do you feel if they're in the middle of talking to you and then they get interrupted by their advisor and they pause you like
mid-speech
all the time on their turf, right? On their dime. They're constantly testing it. And it makes complete sense when you look at it through a lens of how the Bedouin culture before oil money ever set in.
Right.
Which, let's not forget, they were Bedouins until the 1950s. And then almost overnight, the region became billionaires, right? It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's right to
Quite
think about.
rapidly. People don't really understand that when they go to Dubai and they see all this fancy, glittery stuff. There's a famous picture of the road between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, dirt with camels, like from the 1940s, I think it was. And then within like a couple of months, it's this massive 6-lane highway with nice cars on it.
And automated speed traps. It's an incredible place.
They're very efficient about those.
It's an incredible place. But so now you're training the Presidential Guard. Again, that's a whole separate conversation on its own, the stories that must have come along with that. But what I want to understand is how did you craft that career? Why did you want to take your child into that culture? Why did you want her to spend time there? How long did you spend there? How did that whole experience go?
Overall, we lived there for 4 years, which we had intended to stay a little bit longer. But again, found out a birth of a child was coming and you make all kinds of new decisions. That was a very interesting transition. It's interesting when I look at my family growing up in Indiana and myself. Like, they are very content with where they live. They're super happy, and I love going to see them. But once I left home and 18 years old and arrived in Japan, I was like, this is it. I want to see more. I want to travel. Like, I have a hard time staying in one place for a little bit. I just want to keep traveling and seeing new cultures. And so by default, there was no mother involved. It was just myself. So whatever I told my kid, she was going to do. So, hey, grab a backpack. We're going over here. She was like, cool, Dad, let's go. And then, all of her uncles were guys like me. That's just how the environment, good or bad, that's how she grew up. Yeah. And so now she has that mentality of traveling and seeing cultures. And I wanted her to be able to, one, experience the Middle East at her age, to be able to understand the differences of our cultures. One, just for her general awareness, but also to know a little bit about my background and what I was doing. And in that process, ended up meeting another person, and Christy, my wife, and found out that we were going to have another child unexpectedly. And there were some things going on at the time. I was in the middle of buying a sailboat. I had just came back to the U.S. I had an invitation to do a 5-week selection/interview process for a particular organization. I'd completed that and got a job offer, bought the sailboat, found out my wife was pregnant.
Was that a government organization or another private organization?
Let's just say it was, I was hicking up on which one to say. It was to support the U.S. government.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So then, so how old was Jaden, your oldest? Mm-hmm. How old was she when you guys ultimately left Abu Dhabi?
10.
So she was there from 6 to 10.
No, I'm sorry. 9 to 13.
From 9 to 13.
She had just turned 13 when we were leaving.
And what's her opinion now of the Middle East?
She has a pretty direct personality like me, which is interesting to talk to her now as an adult. She loved it. I mean, so growing up in Midwest, in Indiana, she has brown skin. She's half Pacific Islander. So she has this beautiful brown skin, jet black hair. In the early 2000s in Indiana, my sister, who's completely white, walking around with her and her 2 white sons and my brown daughter, people would be like, oh, where did you adopt her from? She'd be like, what? It's my brother's kid. So she kind of had that little racism growing up in Indiana. Not that people were mean to her, but she was a different baby. I remember walking around to Walmart one time, pushing her in a trolley, and there's pictures of children over the children's clothing hanging, and she looks up and points, Dad, like me. It was a black kid. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God, kid, I didn't realize
you haven't had diversity.
I didn't realize this is a real thing. Yeah. So that was one of the driving factors of, hey, let's take my kid around the world. So we had lived in Australia, had an international school there that was fantastic. Abu Dhabi, she was in an multi-international school. Half the populace of the kids were local nationals, and the rest were all expatriate kids. Yep. So she had a beautiful experience, made some really good friends that she's still in touch with from around the world, which not too many kids can really say that they have friends in Canada, Australia, Great Britain, the Middle East still. So she has a pretty good outlook on it. She does know some of the challenges of the cultural differences. Not that the UAE nationals are being rude to you. They're just, matter of fact, very direct.
Right.
No, I don't want that.
Yeah.
It's quite simple to them.
It's their culture.
Yeah, it's fine. And so that's one of the big takeaways that she took was, you are in the United Arab Emirates. Mm-hmm. This is their country. It's their laws. It's their rules. You will respect them. You don't have to agree with them. Yep. You don't have to like them, but you will adhere to them. So now here in America, she was like, this is America. I'm not American by choice. I'm an American by default. Mm-hmm. These are the rules and regulations. Anybody that wants to come to my country, you should do so legally. Just like when I go to the UAE, have to get, biometrics done, blood drawn. There's all these things. If you don't want to be there, if you don't want to do those things, don't go.
Yeah.
Right. So she has that very profound stance on following the rules, not because she's a rule follower. She'll break some rules for sure, but she understands why they're there and why each nation has their own culture and that you should respect their culture.
What an awesome takeaway. I mean, that sounds like a pretty incredible experience for her in the Middle East. My son is the oldest. He's the one that remembers the Middle East the most.
Okay.
My daughter was there from 1 to 3, so she's got a softer memory of it. But but he loved it. The only thing he remembers that's negative is the heat. And the heat is a massive negative. Don't get me wrong. The heat is a massive negative. The winter season is heaven on earth.
Beautiful.
Heaven on earth.
Beautiful.
But when it's like, oh my gosh, 120 degrees outside and the wind is blowing the sand into your face and your eyes and you can't even you turn on your windshield wipers for the sand, not for the rain. It's a whole different.
And then they melt.
Beast. Yeah. And then they melt to the window. Oh my gosh. That was such a wild experience.
It's hot, very hot.
Such a wild experience.